welcome back. This is Jesse Casto sitting in for Jordan Boyles, our world traveler. We're excited to hear more stories from him when he gets back. But right now, I'm with Pastor Shawn Williams. He's our associate pastor, and he's got a word for us today. And Shawn, what do you got for us?
Yeah, well, Jesse, I'm excited to be sitting here with you. This is a big change up for the listener from the normal Viewpoints episode, but what is going to be expected is that we are talking about the parables, specifically Jesus' parable of the Prodigal Son, which is really the parable of the two sons. But this week we're talking about mainly the younger son. And so in Luke chapter 15, Jesus is sharing basically three stories about this answer to the Pharisees and the religious leaders who have a problem with Jesus having fellowship with sinners. These tax collectors and sinners are having a meal with him. He's teaching them, and the holier than thou Pharisees and religious leaders object to this. And Jesus uses these three parables to highlight how misguided their perception is and how far they are from the heart of the Lord. And so in this third parable from Luke chapter 15, Jesus tells about a father who had two sons, an older and a younger, and that the younger son does one of the most disrespectful and horrible things, telling his father, give me my share of what I stand to inherit so that I can go and live the life that I want to live, which in equivalency, he's telling his dad, my life would be better if you were dead and I just had the money that I'm going to get when that happens. So if we can just speed that up and just skip that middle part, that's going to make me the most happy. And the father, to the surprise of, I think, many people, acquiesces. He says, okay, sure. So it says that he divides his wealth. He divides his property between both of his sons, which I think is an important detail that we're going to talk more about next week, is that the older son also gets his share, but the younger son is who we're talking about this week. And so the younger son gets his share, which would have been probably about 1/3 of the property. And we don't see a dollar amount or anything, but we can assume it's a lot. We can assume it's a pretty large figure. I don't think anybody's going to their dad and saying, give me my inheritance, and it's a $20 bill. So we assume it's a lot of money. And then he goes and he's to a faraway land and he squanders it. He spends in reckless living, spends all of the money that he's got, and then something happens that he did not expect. So in kind of living this lifestyle of hedonism, living for his own pleasure, living up to everything that the world has to offer, he is probably in his own mind doing exactly what he wanted to do. He thinks he's living in this free lifestyle. He's away from his father and what he might have perceived to be all these rules and restrictions that were placed on him in his father's house. So he's living up this free lifestyle, making all the choices he wants to do, spending his money the way that he wants to spend it. And as this wealth dwindles away, something happens that he didn't predict, that he didn't plan for. It says a famine struck the land that he was living in, meaning that for whatever reason, there is not enough food to go around. It could have been, a bad crop or drought or, locusts, disease. Anything could have, killed off the food source. And now he is in really bad shape. Certainly not the position he thought he would find himself in. He did not go to his father and say, give me my share of the inheritance so I can go ruin my life. He said, right. Give me my share of the inheritance so that I can go and live the way I see fit. And as he does this, something happens and he ends up way worse off than he ever thought he would be. And because of this famine, he has no more money because of his reckless living. And he ends up basically selling himself into employment, which is not very unlike like indentured servitude or even slavery for that time period, working for a man tending to a field of pigs, which in the context
Exciting.
That Jesus, I particularly enjoy bacon and other pig products. I wouldn't want that job. So I'm very grateful that people have that job. But in the context of Luke chapter 15, not only historically, but also for who is hearing this story. Remember, this is the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. That kind of association with pigs is about the worst possible job you could have because spiritual uncleanliness. And what they were the most focused on their piety and their self-righteousness was all about being spiritually clean. And so Jesus is really emphasizing the younger son is in the worst possible position that he could ever be. Certainly not where he thought he would be. And we get this great turning point in the story where it says he came to his senses, and that at the point of starving to death, so hungry that even the pig slop looks appetizing. He comes to his senses and he returns to his father. And, we talk more about that on Sunday of just the grace of the Father and the love and what that teaches us about God. But what I want to focus on for kind of the rest of the time that we have together is this rock bottom moment for the younger son.
Sure.
Because he thought he was gaining freedom by getting his inheritance and going to live his life, however he wanted to live it. But where he ended up is certainly not what he thought he was going to get. And the Bible teaches warnings like this throughout, particularly in the Proverbs, that says, there's this attractive path, but it leads towards death. And that was the case for the younger son. And I think that's a case for humankind as a whole, that we think we're exchanging a relationship with God. And because we don't know God and how good he is and how gracious he is and how loving he is, what we interpret are a bunch of rules and restrictions to keep us down. And so we exchange that, we rebel against that, we forsake that to go our own way. We think we're living it up. We think we're making all the decisions that please us, that make us look good in the eyes of others, to build up ourselves in whatever way we deem fit. And then we look up at some point and realize, man, I am in more chains than I ever would have been.
For sure.
And so I don't know for you, I can certainly think in my own life of moments of this where sin, like the path of sin always leads towards death. And I can think of times whenever I've kind of looked up and realized, I got to turn around. Do you have a moment like that?
Oh, for sure. As a father and a son, I've experienced different avenues. It's interesting to look at both of those sides. As a son, going into college, you start trying to spread your wings. You think you have some freedom. And inevitably, just as in this story, maybe not feeding pigs, but you end up in a place you don't want to be. And and then as a father, you're trying to teach those lessons. And I can imagine the father in the parable, just how we think he might think, but then how he thought through his father's love. And I think that's just an important lesson for us to all learn.
Yeah, I remember in my own life learning a lesson in kind of a prodigal moment where not to the point of I'm, tending to pigs and starving to death, but certainly trying to live and make my own choices, expecting there to be zero consequences and that everything's just going to keep going my way. This was right after my first year at college, and I was going to be in a good friend of mine's wedding as a groomsman. And so we did a very low-key version of a bachelor party. We were going to go to Palo Duro Canyon to do a camp out. We had, done some gun shooting, like clay pigeons and target shooting earlier in the day. And then we were going to go camp out. And so we took some alcoholic beverages, and I happened to be 19 at the time. And so not only is there that level of, you shouldn't have it legally, but even at the age of 21 or older in Palo Duro Canyon, it's a state park. And so it is illegal for that reason as well. We got caught like immediately. We had just barely gotten a fire started because it was raining. And I think the 5 or 6 of us there had opened a beer each. And this was certainly not the extent of the poor decisions we were going to make, but we got cut off with the red and blue lights of the trooper that pulled up. I got a ticket, and I remember thinking, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, maybe I can run away. Maybe I can just pay the ticket and no one has to have to find out. But then eventually the reality settled in. I was like, I got to tell my dad. And that was a big turning point for me. A scary moment for sure, because if anyone who is listening doesn't know, my dad is in law enforcement. So having to tell him about the law that I broke and the consequence of that was certainly a bit of a scary thing. But
Yes.
then, both of my parents showed me the grace of the Lord that, hey, look, you're going to have to make some corrections, but we're not swinging the hammer at you or anything like that. So
It's amazing how that love back to you, that like gentle correction, or sometimes not so gentle correction. Depends on the situation, I suppose. But
Yeah.
it's amazing how God's love can be reflected through those circumstances and how we learn so much from them.
Certainly, yeah. And so I think for kind of the lesson for this, for our time together right now, from the prodigal son and this whole parable, is don't exchange what is actually good for a fake version of freedom. Really the only choice that we make in departing from the Lord is choosing to put on chains. There is freedom where the Lord is. The Bible makes this very clear, and I think anyone who has followed Jesus has experienced this. The freedom that comes from being near the shepherd is much better than being on the other side of the fence. And that greener grass that looks good at the beginning of that trail away from the Lord is going to lead towards death. And so this was what the younger son experienced. He wanted to make all of his own decisions, and he ended up in the pigsty. And so I think for the listener today, the encouragement would be, don't wait until you're in the pigsty to come to your senses. Try and find that wake-up call. Try and find that clarity and that wisdom to go back to the Father because he is so good.
Yeah, it's what came to my mind when you were talking was the phrase "freedom's never free," and whether it's Christ on the cross, and that's certainly relatable to this story and so many. And I always love how Jesus uses parables or real life situations, and it always amazes me how this far since he's first spoke these words is so applicable to us. And that freedom is never free, and he lets us find that out. And it's such a blessing that he does. It can get hard sometimes, but that's what God's love helps us through.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would just encourage again, if you have not come to see how good God is, then that temptation to leave him can hit much harder. And so, it's my prayer for the listener. It's my prayer that in my own life that we would see over and over and over again how good God is, because that's what woke the younger son up. He said, even my father's servants are taken care of, and because he remembered how good the Father is. And so I think that's the reminder for us too.
Well, I think that is a fantastic point. I always love talking to you, Shawn, and your outlook and how you share the word. And I think just that going out like that, just how awesome God is and the love that he has for us. It's a great word for our audience. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that with us. We look forward to Sunday. And for the listener, you can come join us at 8:30, 10 or 11:30. We'd love to have you. And Pastor Shawn will be presenting this message, and look forward to seeing you and joining us next week.